Okay, here we go. It's Tuesday, and what an incredibly busy day. All day. I'm sure many of you are doing similar things, trying to track all this. It is really wild. First up tonight, before I bring him on, a couple of things. There are any number of different theories out there now. I'm trying to report a few of them. Some of them are just asinine, to put it bluntly. Others are interesting. Others are creative. There are a lot of them out there. One of them is that 5G and this bioengineered SARS 2.0 coronavirus are a binary weapon system. I don't buy it. I've said that before. I think they're two very deleterious parallel events that certainly may contribute from the 5G end of things to making the virus worse. I don't think it was planned that way necessarily. There are any number of electromagnetic field issues out there which can degrade the body's functions, from blood, hemoglobin and oxygen content to the baseline immune system and so forth. Do I think that they planned this out? Oh, absolutely. If you know anything at all about supercomputers and wargaming, you'll know that the Pentagram spends untold amounts of money on the top-of-the-line supercomputers, AI-propelled, as it were, running wargame scenarios. Well, let's call this one a geopolitical social wargame scenario, which has been run for years and years, and honestly, they know plus or minus 1% exactly how this is going to play out. They know how much pushback there's going to be from the public. They know how much the public will tolerate, how much it won't tolerate. They know all things about all questions. Nothing is left to chance. Those at the 1% of the 1%, know what's going to happen. It's all like shooting fish in a barrel to them. So what I want to do now is bring on my friend of many, many years and hear his idea of how this all shakes out. I'm not here to pass judgment. I would ask that none of you pass judgment. Simply consider with an open mind his thesis and those other theses, or are they feces, that you would see and consider online. And there certainly is a lot of that flying around. So with that said, let me say hello to Dr. David Duke. Hello, David. Welcome back.
Hello, Jeff. It's great to talk to you. And I'm actually taping this as well, at least they're filming my end of it. And I feel like it's going to be a seminal show, a very important program. And it's a subject that I've been doing a lot of research on over the last few weeks. I really got up to speed on it all. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a biologist. My doctorate is in history. But I think I'm an interesting individual, intelligent individual who reads, and I have been able to access the top medical authorities in the world, the people who've been studying this virus around the world. These are not part of this system. They're not part of the establishment per se. They're just normal doctors, whether they be in China or whether they be in Europe, who've been studying the disease from universities and other areas where they've been trying to figure out what's going on with this disease. And I think what's interesting to me is that the science that the doctors are coming up with is very, very different than the theme of the politicians who are controlling this country and controlling the world. I do believe that this epidemic is a true pandemic. It is a disease. I believe it's a form of the flu. A lot of flus are, quote, coronaviruses. They have that corona on them, the protein spikes, which embed themselves into the body, and then they spread their disease. It's really an interesting disease. I often want to start this conversation with people by expressing what my father used to tell me as a young boy. He used to tell me, son, and he was a real scientist. He was a geologist and a petroleum engineer. He loved evolutionary theory. He loved to study nature. In fact, that's how he found oil for the oil company he worked for. But he was always a lover of science. And he always told me, he said, son, the truth is stranger than fiction, and science is stranger than fiction when you think about it. And when you look at apparently the origins of this disease, and it's very interesting, it appears that most of the science tells us it is the same virus which was first detected in certain kinds of bats in China. Now, there may be contention about all that, but that seems to be the scientific contention, and there's a lot of other people who've kind of confirmed this. And it's interesting that a number of diseases have come from bats over the years. For instance, perfect example, one of the major transmitters of rabies, which is a disease that's been around for hundreds of years, it was certainly not created in a laboratory, was rabies. And rabies is a horrific disease that basically hijacks a living person or a living animal and then turns them into doing their bidding. It's really a zombie disease. And the interesting thing about one of the interesting things about the coronavirus or COVID-19 is the fact that it is a zombie disease. It basically hijacks the human cell, and it turns that cell into a machine that replicates this organism. A lot of people even contest that these viruses are truly life forms. They're more like an enzyme. But what they do is they have their RNA. They're an RNA virus. RNA is a single strand, and this single strand RNA takes over the nucleus of the cell and turns a human cell into a factory to replicate the virus. And evolution and evolutionary theory in terms of diseases and life forms is very interesting because it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It's just the idea, how did they figure out how to replicate the virus? Well, one thing that it does is that it gets people, the people get this virus, they get sick with the virus, and it's a respiratory disease. And with the virus, it starts to produce more and more of their organisms. It clogs up the airways. It destroys lung tissue. It affects the nasal passage. They believe that it affects there. And then what happens is that it causes you to get sick. And just like most flus or colds, you get itchy eyes and you rub your eyes. You get the sniffles and you rub your nose with your fingers. You touch your mouth. And when you do that, you carry the virus to your hands. And one of the interesting things about the COVID-19 virus is the fact that, and this is really interesting, is that the virus has the ability to live a long time on surfaces that you touch. For instance, on wood, glass, steel, plastic. It can live up to a week or so, even more, perhaps, on plastics.
That's right. They're saying 9 days outside the body on a non-hostile hard surface, plastic, stainless steel, and so forth. Okay.
And this is the beginning of the stories they're making up about this virus, is that they say that this virus is like an airborne virus. But we've been studying, and scientists have been studying viruses for generations now. And let's take a true airborne virus. Let's take, for instance, measles. Measles is very destructive. It kills a lot of people. And measles can be transmitted very easily simply by the breath. If you're in a room, if you're a long way, you don't have to be the 3 foot. The World Health Organization and scientists say that really the only distance you really have to have is 3 feet. They say 6 feet just to be sure. But they're convinced that if you're 6 feet away from a person, and you're not going to be transmitting the disease to them. Like now, if you're kissing somebody, you're hugging them, close relative or so forth, you have a good chance. But the main driver seems to be the fact that this is a very thick virus. Now, measles, as I was telling you, is a virus that's extremely tiny. It has these tiny nuclei, which they call tiny droplets, which are nuclei, compared to the COVID virus. And this nuclei, or this virus, is so small, so tiny. It's something like half of a micron, just a nano of a meter. Very tiny, tiny, tiny particle, invisible to the naked eye. It's so light and so small it can hang in the air. And this is exactly why measles is so contagious. you can get one person in a room, and the likelihood is, they've done many studies of this, you can get, and the likelihood is, if you have 5 people in a room, 4 or 5 out of the 5 are going to get the measles virus just from being in a room for a short period of time with a person. This is not true of the COVID-19. It seems to be spread mostly through the hands, and it's still respiratory. But there's 2 factors of this which spread the disease. One is the factor that human beings, on average, and there's been many scientific studies of this where they simply watch a human being, film him for hours. Human beings touch their face about 20 times per hour. Now, when you have a sickness or when you have these symptoms, like you got runny nose, you're going to touch your face more often. If you're sneezing or coughing, most people reflexively are going to put their hands over their mouth to block a cough, to be polite, to put their hands over a sneeze. They're going to touch, they're going to rub their eyes, they're going to rub their nose, and this is high concentrations of this virus. Once somebody touches their hands to this, and this is one reason why they originally told us that a mask wasn't that much of a protection. A mask is good to stop the spread of the disease for somebody once they have the virus, and it does help in terms of a really close contact with a doctor or a nurse, and there is some degree of protection. But the way this disease is really spread dramatically is through the touch. And I'll give you an example how I can prove this. This makes perfect sense. Here's the report by the World Health Organization, by their top scientists all over the world. It says basic protective measures against the new coronavirus. I'll just quote this. And let me do one thing. Let me turn off the night light on my computer so my old eyes.
A quick thing here. Hold on. While you're doing that, the Chinese... Yeah, the Chinese have studied the aerosolization of the coronavirus, and they've given it 30 to 40 minutes of hang time in the air, not hours, 30 to 40 minutes. And they've also demonstrated speaking. If somebody speaks, you spew a little bit of aerosolized saliva, and in the saliva can be virus. So speaking alone, if you're really close to somebody...
30 minutes. But it's heavier.
If you're really close to, that's why it falls away quickly.
Exactly.
But you can be close enough to someone, you speak at them, and you can spew on them. That's what they're saying. That's why the 6 feet is, in my view, the most important social distance aspect of this whole attack.
That's the most important social distance, but let's look at their preventative measures here. It says, stay aware of the latest information on the COVID-19 outbreak available on the WHO website. Take care of your health and protect others by doing the following. So the first thing they say to do is, number 1, wash your hands frequently. Regularly and thoroughly clean your hands with an alcohol-based hand rub or wash them with soap and water. Of course, soap and water has it's like a lipid base. Soap used to be made, of course, of animal fat. And fat goes with the shell of the virus is fat, and that dissolves the fat and destroys the organism very easily. It just takes about 20 seconds of hand washing. It says why? Because washing your hands with soap and water or using alcohol-based hand rub kills the viruses that may be on your hands. So the first thing they say is wash your hands, right? The next thing they say is, number 2, avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Why? It says hands touch many surfaces and can pick up viruses. Once contaminated, hands can transfer the virus to your eyes, nose, or mouth, the mucus in them. From here, the viruses can enter your body and make you sick. Okay, so the first 2 things they say are wash your hands and don't touch your face. So if this is true, then why the big emphasis on the mask? The truth is that the average person that gets the coronavirus is going to touch a lot of objects. I mean, think about it. You touch the door arm, you touch the toilet handle, you touch the sink handle, you touch the pen. If you go to a doctor's office, you grab the clipboard and fill out the form, right? It's all over the place. If you go to a grocery store, you have hundreds of people checking out. The cashier grabs every single item with their hands, their bare hands in most cases. They're starting to wear gloves now, thank God, and do sanitize, but most of them still aren't sanitizing between customers. And that's hundreds of different people who could very well be, with the virus, who have the virus. So these 2 things are the first thing. Then it says maintain social distancing. Number 3, modes of transmission of virus, and they talk about it. So I read this report, and there's a major report. I found this on April 1st. It was published just on March 29, just a few days ago, before the weekend. And here's what it says. This is the major report. Modes of transmission of the COVID-19 virus. It says, listen to this. Respiratory, and you're so right, Jeff, you're so right. Respiratory infections can be transmitted through droplets of different sizes. When the droplet particles are 5 to 10 millimolars, that's the international term for a very tiny diameter.
Right.
They are referred to as a respiratory droplet. And when they are less than 5 millimolars in diameter, they are referred to as droplet nuclei. According to current evidence, COVID-19 virus is primarily transmitted between people through respiratory droplets and contact routes. That's the hands. So an analysis of 75,465 COVID-19 cases in China, airborne transmission was not reported. It's almost non-existent, airborne transmission. Then they go on to talk about the fact how there's been media reports that this can be transferred in the atmosphere and someone can sneeze. One person, in fact, asked Dr. Fauci if someone could cough and how they could go 26 feet. And they looked at that report, and these are like the top doctors of the world. There's 25 footnotes here. It says droplet transmission occurs when a person is in a close contact within 1 meter with someone who has respiratory symptoms, coughing or sneezing. And most of the time, people aren't coughing and sneezing all over them. Or
1 meter is 3 feet, a little over 3 feet.
Yeah, exactly, 3 feet. So then it goes on, it says, with risk of having your mucosa, mouth or nose, or conjunctive eyes exposed to potentially infected virus. And then it goes to our fomites, meaning the surfaces, immediate environment, and around the infected person. Therefore, transmission of the COVID-19 virus can occur with direct contact with infected people and indirect contact with surfaces in the immediate environment or with objects used of the affected person, stethoscope or thermometer. So basically, Tucker said the other day on television, he said, look, he says, something's wrong with this picture. All right, everybody's supposed to stay home, right? But nobody's being told to wear gloves. There's two things gloves do. One is gloves prevent the virus from being absorbed into your hands. And by the way, your body, your skin is your largest organ, and your skin is very porous. A lot of viruses can enter through the skin, just like medicines can be applied to your skin. So a glove keeps that virus from going into the hands of the things you're touching. Secondly, when you have a glove on, this like the small little exam gloves, and they're cheap, and by the way, there's trillions of them. There's no shortage of gloves. When you have gloves on, what happens is it makes you not touch your face because you've got this big, green glove or blue glove or black glove, and you're approaching your face, and you say, hey, I'm not supposed to touch my face.
Gloves and masks do that. The other issue with gloves is if you're wearing gloves, it goes on, you ought to disinfect the gloves with your hand sanitizer while you're wearing the gloves. So do that too.
I had a meeting with my provider, my medical provider, a really fine doctor locally where I live the other day, and we had an hour-and-a-half meeting on this, and he's taking a lot of my messages that he thinks are really important, and he's spreading it to the medical community, going right to the top of the people in the state and saying the stuff that I'm talking about. Even though I'm not a doctor, I'm a historian, he said this stuff is so important about spreading it. Anyway, the document says that, and it looks at this report saying it can be spread. He says, quote, it says airborne transmission may be possible in specific circumstances and settings in which procedures or support treatments that generate aerosols are performed. In other words, endotracheal intubation, which is like the ventilation, bronchoscopy, open suctioning, administration of nebulized treatment, manual ventilation before intubation, turning the patient to prone position, disconnecting the patient from a ventilator, non-invasive positive pressure. So they're saying that's exactly why there's so much of this virus to the medical conditioners. And I talked to a person that works in a major hospital in New Orleans the other day, and he said everybody at his pharmacy in the hospital, they were all infected, right? And that's because of the unique nature of hospitals. As always, hospitals are the most dangerous place you can go.
Well, David, just a quick note, if I may. That's why many of these large hospitals are essentially empty right now. Hospitals do not want sick people with this virus coming to their ERs, sitting on their chairs, in the lounges, spreading and contaminating the entire emergency room and the personnel. Don't go there. That's what they want. They want you to go get tested. They say go see your primary health care practitioner, who, by the way, also doesn't want you anywhere near his or her office. Believe that. So you've got to go in one of these drive-up lines to get tested if your area happens to have one. The hospitals also have...
My friend tested negative, and he's been using the gloves and using the sanitizer and being very protective. And a couple of his buddies that weren't, they all got infected with the virus. And the hospital itself, when he went to the administrator of the hospital, the administrator said, well, what you say is all true, but it's too late. Everybody has the virus now, right? I mean, it's absolutely insane.
There are people suggesting that eventually may be the case. The other issue with the hospitals, David, as you know, is that all elective procedures and tests are canceled. They're trying to build space to be ready if this thing gets to the point where many project it will go. So hospitals are very quiet now, many of them. There's nothing really going on there. It's very quiet, understandably. If you know the background of what hospitals are charged with doing and why they have adopted these policies, you'll understand why they're basically empty right now, at least apparently empty, because inside there are a lot of people being treated, but you don't see them from the outside. Go ahead.
Talk about this pandemic apocalypse. It's only an apocalypse because the government policies and protocols are making it an apocalypse. They are destroying the economy. They are overwhelming our healthcare system. And the facts of the disease totally tell us that this virus is there's very little difference to the other unique flu. And we've had lots of novel viruses, infections over the years. It's not much difference than they are. And even the death rate, more and more evidence is coming out that the death rate is completely consistent with other kinds of flus. Let me give you an example. Last year in the United States of America, there were 80,000 deaths from the flu last winter season. A year ago, that's right. There were 80,000 deaths that we know of from the flu, just in the United States alone. Probably millions across the world. Millions across the world, right? And now that was one of the biggest flu seasons recently. And this year, up until the coronavirus, we had something like 40 or 50,000, far more than we even have now after months of this virus raging, all right? Now, look at who the virus is killing, all right? It's very consistent with all flus. For instance, let's just take a look at it for a second. All right, there was a study in Italy, many studies, and they've been studying all this all over the world. It's very easy to figure out who's getting the disease. Well, in Italy, they found out that 99% of the deaths were people with existing serious medical conditions, right? Fact. 99% of the people dying. In New Orleans, they just recently completed a study, and they said 98% of the people that died in New Orleans. Now, New Orleans has been a hot spot. And they've had 560 deaths in New Orleans since the beginning of this a couple of months ago. That's pretty big. And so, but you look at the deaths, if 98% of them were people that were already sick with serious diseases, right? And or 99%, whatever it is, then that means instead of 560 deaths, there would have been 5.6 deaths, right? 1%.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah,
right?
I got it. Yeah.
5 deaths. That'd be less than the flu. So why in the world is the government having this shutdown of every business, every restaurant, every school? Because when the truth is, all you've got to do, all society could do, you could just focus on the minority of people, the small number of people that have pre-existing conditions, and especially the elderly, like in the old age homes and the nursing homes and so forth.
All extended care facilities. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and the truth is, the reason why they're getting this disease, it's part of what we're talking about earlier, the hygiene, the hand washing. They have the people that are cleaning up in these places and feeding these people and taking care of these people are mostly not nurses. That's just a small percentage. The people breeding them stuff are just average minimum wage people who are dirty, who don't clean properly, who don't know to do anything, and who themselves can easily be infected and bring it in. And so if we would have, instead of closing down every business, would have simply said, okay, if you have a pre-existing condition, if you're running with COPD, that's almost a death penalty if you get this disease. You don't go to work. You don't go to the supermarket. You get your family to do it. You self-isolate yourself in case one of your family members do it. You don't have to do it forever, 2 or 3 weeks. You stay in your room, right? Or you go out occasionally in the sunlight. That's all healthy. You shouldn't stay in your house. Sunlight gives you nitrous oxide, which helps your immune system, and sunlight also helps your immune system. We fight off these viruses. That's what you do, and that's all you have to do. Now, there's a really fantastic doctor who's one of the top epidemiologists in the world. He has modeled more viruses over the last 35 years than almost anybody else. He's got a video. I can send you a link, and we can put it under the show so people can watch this video. His name is Knut Witkowski. He's definitely a Polish guy, good guy. Yeah. You got to watch this video because he points out that if the government would not have closed down the schools, there's no question that the virus would have spread massively to people who are not going to be harmed. Kids are the most immune to this system. Now, that's not saying that no flu ever hurts a child, but almost no children are harmed. But
he said it would be over in 40 days.
Yes. He said it'd be over in 2 weeks. He said, because that's how fast the virus spreads. Because kids always are touching each other, playing and wrestling and moving around and hugging each other. Well,
I think the 40 days had to do with the incubation period.
Right. And the incubation is probably, they say it's between 5 days and 2 weeks.
It's 14 days as long as 34 days. That's the spread.
Well, maybe it could be. Well, again, the virus can live in surfaces, so that could also be a factor. But the point is that there's something called herd immunity. This is a scientific fact. And this is why every disease epidemic, every kind of flu epidemic, and every other kind of epidemic, it's not just been vaccines that have stopped it. It's because when they get this massive herd immunity, what happens is if you have a good immune system, like a kid does, all right, you begin making antibodies as soon as that virus is introduced to your body. And so you never get much symptoms to it, or even a healthy middle-aged person, or even a healthy old person that doesn't have these underlying conditions, right?
Right.
So what happens is that this immunity is also transferred to other people. And what happens, the virus then cannot find other hosts, and so the virus dies. If the virus can't find another host, somebody to replicate it and spread it, because most people now have antibodies in it, it dies and it passes and everything turns back to normal. Now, the big problem with this disease, obviously, is the fact that it's the government. This is an apocalypse, no question about it. This is the most destructive thing to human beings in your and I lifetime. It's not the virus which is killing so many people. All right, first off, let's take the old people. If 98% of the people who died had already existing conditions, right, and overwhelmingly mostly the older people as well who have those conditions usually at worst stages, if that's true, wouldn't we be saving their lives if we'd have kept those people from going to work, or those people from going to restaurants to self? Of course we would. If 98% of the people have underlying conditions, and they were kept from exposure to the virus with very stringent controls and help and assistance, if that was the case, that the virus would take 99% less lives, correct? I mean, that's like basic stuff, right? So instead, what we're doing, Jeff, is we're destroying our economy. We're also transferring massive amounts of money from the Goyim, it's the only way I can put it, the Goyim know, from the Goyim to these international Zio bankers like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. bank.
Right.
And JP Morgan, by the way, is by Jamie Dimon, who's a big Zionist. And, of course, Goldman Sachs today is run by none other than David Solomon, a big Zionist. Now, Goldman Sachs has really, and this is where the conspiracy comes in. They saw this virus running rampant in China, and they knew it was going to travel because in globalism, which is also a product of the Zionists who control our government, they knew that it was going to come. They knew that it was going to cause a condition. And they, along with their brothers in the media like CNN, which is, by the way, the same stockholders as Goldman Sachs. And by the way, Goldman Sachs hated Trump so much, and I have a lot of problems with Trump myself, but they hated Trump so much, right, that they said any employee that gave one dime to Donald Trump would be fired from Goldman Sachs, right? So they knew that they could, with their help in the media, create this pandemic. They could spook the stock market. They could then sell the stock market short, right? They could make trillions of dollars, and they could take away the wealth of that middle class because most people,
same old story, same old song and dance.
Right. Yeah, most working Americans, think about this now, have retirement funds by their police fund or by their teacher's fund or by their company or by their 401ks or by their IRAs. This is most working Americans, whether you're union members or middle class or whatever. They have funds, and all those funds are controlled by the big banks and big interests in these investment firms, and they're all invested in the stock market. And 90% of people with stock portfolios have taken a huge hit, many more than 50%. It depends on what stocks that you own. But guess what? The hedge fund operators, the biggest contributors in politics and the controllers of our society and the media people, they haven't been affected in the same way. They've been excused from this. And Goldman Sachs itself tried to say that there was going to be a huge decline in the markets to also spook people, and support selling everything. They made money. So once you start the selling panic, and you're on that short side of the sale, you make the money. It takes two. It takes a buyer and a seller in the stock market, right?
Right.
And
sure.
And they've induced this panic, and they've induced this apocalypse. And if this thing would have been the reason why China got over it, because they didn't really know what they had at first. That's what my belief is. And so it really spread, and it spread so much in Wuhan was the biggest spread that it basically exhausted itself. There became what you call a herd immunity that got there. The virus simply lost propulsion because it couldn't be spread to hosts that could. Well,
it burned through the majority of the populace,
yes,
and 80% survived it. But they apparently had a lot of fatalities, maybe up to 2 million. Some people say much more than that countrywide. I don't know. We're not there. But we do have the stories about the crematories at work and the air pollution and the black rain in Japan and so on. Go ahead.
One thing I get upset about Trump is the real problem in this country is not China controlling Hollywood. Like Alex Jones says, it's not China controlling our media. They're not the big owners and controllers of CNN or the Washington Post or the New York Times or ABC, NBC, CBS. You know who they are. I know who they are. They're all Zionists, right? They're all loyal to the state of Israel, not China, right? But you can't attack them. Look, I don't like China. I'm an American firster. But the reason why China has been able to take over our trade and our manufacturing and all of these things is because the international Zionist, establishment around the world, the banks, they've made billions of money selling out America and selling out Europe to China. That's the fact. You can't blame the Chinese for that. And I tell you something else, too. China's got 1.4 billion people. And there's no visitors to the world more than the Chinese. No wonder some of them got this virus and spread it to Europe and America. And that's a serious thing and not a good thing. There's no wonder about that. But here's the deal. If they were really having millions of deaths right now and the virus was still raging in China, it would be obvious to everyone. First of all, we know China's back working. We know that because we can look at the pollution levels, and that's from space satellites. We know they've been almost fully back at work for about a month now. In fact, they're having sporting events. They're not doing it.
Not fully, but they have been working in stages to
they're almost completely back
ignite
now.
their manufacturing behemoth, and they're close.
Even the center of this, and so this is what's going on, and because the Chinese.
By the way, David, the full lockdown in Wuhan was just lifted today officially.
That's right. It was fully lifted today.
Mm-hmm.
That was
76 days. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It was. But it was also the biggest single, and probably some of the lockdown even kept it from going, because what happens is, as Dr. Witowski says very clearly, Knut Witowski, and you got to watch this video, as he shows, the virus would have taken about 3 weeks to run it, so that actually prevents further cases quickly. When you start doing the social distancing, when you start doing the isolation and making people not be able to go out, what happens is the herd immunity doesn't happen as soon. The herd immunity actually ends up saving more lives than it takes. And again, if you're concerned, and I am, about older people, my ex-wife's mother is 94 years old. The grandmother of my two girls, my two children. I don't want her to get this virus and disease, and I don't want any older person to do it. And we got to respect our older people, our European American people, and other peoples around the world. I'm not even interested only in Europeans. I don't want anybody to die from this virus. I don't want any old person or any other person to die from this virus. And if we had focused, it cost us this bailout was trillions of dollars. Most of it went to the big banks, the same firms that caused all this. We had this big trillions of dollars. We're going to be in debt. We're going to have inflation. Our money's not going to be worth anything. Our taxes are going to double. Our healthcare system's totally been overwhelmed and destroyed by this. And but herd immunity.
Some would say, what health system? It was never prepared to handle this on a national basis. You know that. The National Repository of Strategic Materials was never rebuilt under Obama, who ran it down in 2008 and 2009 to a significant degree, and Trump, who paid no attention to it whatsoever in 3 years and 4 months. None.
Well, you're totally right about all that. Here, let me show you something. I got something prepared for you to show what I'm talking about here. How this, the whole idea, this is the apocalypse of this virus, that they made this out to be the scare thing. So I pulled up, this was created by Lancet magazine, the very respected British publication on medical science around the world, and keeps track of diseases and tracks deaths all over the country. And this study and these numbers are called the number by deaths by cause in the world, the entire world, for 2017. It takes about a year or so a year and a half to get all these things compiled and up to date and accurate, right? So this is the deaths in 2017, and very similar, I'm sure, in 2018, 2019, and our year. All right. The first amount of deaths is cardiovascular disease. That's almost 18 million, right? Cancers, 10 million. This is globally. Respiratory diseases are 3.91 million, and most of those are from COPD, and only less than 0.2 or 0.3, all right, of the amount of respiratory diseases are from the flu, even though it's still significant. Lower respiratory infections are 2.5 million. And again, most of that, this coronavirus didn't even hardly show up. The death toll of coronavirus in the world is expected, and by the current models, not the original models that they told us about when they shut down everything, it's expected to be 0.2, not even 1%. Not even 1% of the population, 0.1 or 0.1 of 1%, whatever. We're talking about incredible numbers of disease victims. Just listen to these diseases and the great numbers. Cardiovascular, again, 18 million. Cancers, 10 million. Respiratory diseases, 3.91. This is not coronavirus. Dementia, right? 2.5 million. Digestive diseases, 2.3 million. Neonatal disorders, 1.78 million. Diarrhea diseases, like, epidemics such as that cause you, like typhoid or typhus and things like that. Diabetes, 1.37 million. Liver diseases, 1.32. Rotor injuries are 1.24 in the world. Kidney disease, 1.23. Tuberculosis, 118. HIV AIDS is almost 1 million a year. Suicide by itself is 793. That's going to spike. You can be sure. Parkinson's disease.
Already is. Yeah.
So you realize we're talking right now in the world. You're talking, less than the flu of last year, far less. Now, but our healthcare system's been overwhelmed, right? Our healthcare system's going broke. What we have. What do you think the insurance rates are going to be for the American working people next year when they try to buy their health insurance? As it is, a lot of people can't afford it, and they just go without. As it is, they end up losing their home.
Those days are all over. Nobody would be buying health insurance anymore.
Of course they are. So the apocalypse is not this epidemic. The apocalypse and even the deaths. Again, if we would have simply concentrated on the elderly and the people with underlying diseases, we would have saved 90% of them, 95% that had died from this
and had
thing.
enough masks to give them all masks so they wouldn't spew the virus everywhere. Correct. Of course.
Exactly. And if we'd had, and instead of having grocery stores where they're clogged with people and every checkout person is grabbing every piece of food that hundreds of people are touching without sanitizing their hands each time, their gloves each time, because they're not doing that in most cases. I haven't seen it yet in a supermarket. I went to Walgreens. Thank you for that, Jeff.
I'm glad. Well, good. Very good. You're welcome.
So I don't think I had the disease, but it's better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
And if it was trying to infect me, Allison C., I think it really helped. And anything.
I take 2 a day, one in the morning, one at night. I could take 3 a day if I want, but I think for me right now, I'm healthy. 2 a day, that gives me a tremendous advantage, immunologically speaking. Go ahead.
It does. And again, sunshine is very important. Not only do you get vitamin D3, which is probably the biggest immune booster there is, you also get nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is produced when you go out in the sunshine. And that is one of the biggest immune producers that you can have. And I always tell people this, and this is a very important information. Anytime I take a supplement, I am sure when I'm taking it normally like you do, you take 2 of the simple capsules. Those capsules are already pretty strong. That's the right way to do it. Don't overtake your supplements. If you take too much zinc, you'll end up, when you don't have that kind of level, you'll end up being deficient, or it can have side effects.
Take as directed. TAD. Read the bottle. Take the dose. That's it.
Yeah, and the most important thing I really suggest people to do is eat your macronutrients from true whole food. That's what gives you your true nutrients. And you can take a few other supplements if you have issues that you're dealing with. But don't overtake supplements, not even vitamin D3. But I do think we need a lot more.
You can actually get sick and end up in the hospital, and a very good friend of mine once did exactly that. He took too much.
And too much vitamin C, I don't think is good for you. I really don't.
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know about D3.
There's a lot of evidence that the antioxidants, the way that these antioxidants work, is by hermetic effect. So they basically cause you oxidative stress, and then the body moves to try to repair your oxidative stress, you see. So you can understand that too much oxidative stress, like too much C or too much of the so-called antioxidants, polyphenols, can actually do the opposite of what you want. I mean, I've been looking into these things for a long time. So you just, moderation in all things. I'm an old Stoic kind of guy, Stoic philosopher, and I believe in just moderation. But keep healthy, exercise every day, get sunlight every day, get good sleep every day, and you'll be okay. And I don't think you'll die even if you get of older age. Knock on wood, I don't want to die from this virus. But I know one thing, I'm not going to go out of this house to any place without gloves. And I take a little bottle of sanitizer with me in my pocket and leave it in my car. And so that way, when I'm touching the cart, I'm using strictly my gloves. And then before I go out of that store, right, or outside the door, I'm just got the sanitizer in my gloves. It takes about 2 seconds to wipe it out.
Sure.
And then when I touch my car steering wheel again, I've got sanitized gloves and probably almost still wet from the sanitizer. Same thing with my door lock. Same thing with my doorknob. And then I go in and wash my gloves first thing. And you can use those gloves again, by the way, if you've washed them really well. And they do wash out very well. And then you can take them off. After you wash the gloves, you take them off. Then you wash your hands again. And you clean up, and you also wash any of the food that you brought home from the store, any of these bottles of vitamins or minerals or prescriptions or whatever else you have, or shampoo or whatever, because you don't know who's put them on the shelf, and you don't know what that checkout woman or a guy has on their hands from touching hundreds of other items with this very, very dangerous coronavirus all over the place.
All right. Well said. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about some more of the effects now in the final minute, unless you want to talk about.
Here's a little bit of a quickie. Anyone out there who thinks he or she may have been infected, what you want to do is pull in a full breath of air and hold it. The recommendation is 10 seconds. I would say 30 seconds. Hold it, count to 30. If you don't start coughing, that means you've got no fibrosis issues in your lungs, and you're probably just fine. If you begin coughing uncontrollably or whatever, you may have lung damage, which is certainly indicative of an asymptomatic infection of this particular virus. Hold your breath 30 seconds, let it go, and if you're fine, no coughing, you're probably just 100%
Boy, that's
normal.
really great advice. And there's another aspect of that, too. There's a lot of people, and the science of this is backing it up. There's a lot of research being done on this. We've learned now that it has a hermetic effect, that by holding your breath, like deep divers, the people that do the long divers and people that hold their breath, by doing breath exercises where you you count to 4, you take a deep breath and you fill your lungs. You go all the way down into your abdomen, and then you hold your breath for a count to 10 or 15, whatever you can do. If you can do it to 30, do it to 30. And then you exhale slowly for another count of, say, 15 to 20. And then you take another deep breath with a count of 4 or 5, right? And you do this about 4 or 5 cycles. It really does make your lungs more receptive and healthy. It really affects your breathing and your oxygenation in your lungs. And it also helps the blood-brain barrier in terms of the oxygenation of the brain. It's really good for your mental acuity as well. Hope I've had good mental acuity today, as old as I am. I'm not as old yet, but I'm working on it. I'm in my 80s now, just about.
Sound great, as always. Yeah. This is all very good, excellent information. There are, again, online, almost an infinite number of theories running around. Some are intentionally skewed to make people more afraid. Some are just put together by people with green screens who want to sound important. It's a real jungle out there. So just be careful, and all I can suggest is look at the headlines, read the headlines, and you'll come away with a pretty reasonable, middle-of-the-road understanding of reality as we can best perceive it now. I understand the big picture that what David is talking about here is the virus and the pandemic are being used to reformat and terraform the geopolitical social world in which we live. This is all being changed now. That's what's going on.
It's the headline at CNBC. As we know, it's a subsidiary of NBC, which is run by Mr. Roberts, by the way. His real name is Maritsky, a big Jewish family, Zionist family. And the headline reads, this corner of Wall Street, it's not just a corner, this is the 2 biggest banks on the planet. And that's Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. And that's, again, Jamie Dimon and David Solomon. And this is the headline, the corner of Wall Street is making a mint for JP Morgan and Goldman as the stock market tanks. All right? That was all the way back. That was the beginning. They got in on this in the beginning. They knew this ahead of everybody else.
Of course they did.
And they purposely tanked the market, and they bought up all these stocks. When I was a kid, I read a book by Jewish historians on the Rothschild family. And the big story was Wellington, and fighting Napoleon at Waterloo. And they set up this communication across the English Channel And when Napoleon had lost, they sent out the message to the Rothschild people in Britain that Napoleon had lost. So the
you know how they sent the message out? How did they send the message out?
By lanterns and also pigeons. They did
pigeons, homing pigeons. That's right.
And lanterns too, right? And rowboats across the anyway. So what they did was, what they put out the fake news that Napoleon had won, which made the British stock market totally tank. They swept in and bought it up for pennies.
Pennies on the dollar, so to speak.
Yes. Major firms which are bound to come back. And by the way,
to control the country.
A little bit of advice about somebody who's had little stock things in your life. Right now, the stock is 30%, 35% off its lows. It may go lower. We don't know. But I'm telling you something. There's no better barometer. These things always come back, especially the indexes. If you have any stocks or you have any retirement because of your business or your work or your school or your whatever, what you do is you take the money, you get out of these individual stocks and just put it in an index of the big firms, because the big firms are always going to be backed up, you see, by the Federal Reserve. The big firms, like for even Boeing, for instance, they got the big bailout, right?
Right.
This is who the Dow is. They've
been offered $50 billion, I think. No, more than that.
So the world, they have huge clout. They're not going to go under, right?
No, it's too big of a part of the American economic base. Oh, yeah.
So when you see the index selling at 40% or 50 or 60% of the value it had 6 months ago, and yet they still have a good bottom line, put your money there. Be smart. Find out. Look at this is exactly what Goldman Sachs is doing. Well, they got everybody else to sell and to panic. This is what they did in 2007, 2008.
Right.
And that's my suggestion to those people out there who retirement funds.
Okay.
Don't
All right, we got to wrap it up. Thank you, David. Well presented. I appreciate it very much. You got a lot of people who pay close attention to what you say, so
we'd have
very
no
well
hospital
done.
crisis, right? If we had no hospital crisis at all, if the 98% of the people who are in the hospital, in the ICUs, who have underlying conditions, if they wouldn't have gotten the virus, that's who we needed to socially change, and that would have cost no money, and there'd be no problem with the hospital
system. Leadership, no preparation, done. They were sacrificed. All right. Talk soon.